My name is Tony Sikoria, 50 years old, an orthopedic trauma surgeon at one of New York's leading medical centers. For decades, my world had been reduced to X-ray films and anatomical structures measured with millimeter precision. A universe where flesh, bone, and surgical accuracy were the only realities that mattered. To me, the human body was nothing more than a complex biological machine. When a part broke, I repaired it. When a frame shattered, I realigned it and fused it with steel screws. In my operating room, there was never any space for spirituality, mystery, or dreams beyond what could be cut, stitched, and stabilized. I devoted my life to evidence-based medicine. A soul? In my world, that was merely electrical impulses racing along neural fibers. When the heart stopped beating, everything ended, dissolving into nothingness. That ironclad belief kept my hands steady in the blood-soaked chaos of emergency surgery. But behind the polished white coat of a respected department head, something inside me was quietly rotting away. I began to feel exhausted. Not from the long hours in surgery, but from the coldness that had overtaken my spirit. I watched patients die without a flicker of compassion. At home, I faced my wife and children like a stranger renting space in his own house. We still spoke, but only about bills and schoolwork. The emotional bridge between us had collapsed. I stood at the summit of wealth and professional success, yet inside I was completely hollow. Praise from colleagues echoed around me while I drifted further from life itself. At night, I feared the silence of my own thoughts. I had lived like a soulless machine until one fateful afternoon in August, when a bolt of lightning struck and changed me forever. That day at Sleepy Hollow Lake began beneath a flawless blue sky. The air was filled with laughter as my family celebrated a shared birthday party for 5 relatives. I stood at the grill, smoke rising around me, children shouting in joy, yet I still felt like an outsider watching life through glass. Suddenly, I felt the urge to call my mother, who couldn't attend the gathering. I walked toward the main building, where a public payphone was mounted on a wooden wall. I lifted the receiver, dialed her number, and waited. The long, ringing tone echoed again and again. Just as I was about to hang up, a blinding blue-white flash exploded from the handset straight into my face. A deafening crack thundered beside my ear. It was lightning. A surge of millions of volts tore through my skull, raced down my body, and hurled me backward like a rag doll. In an instant, the world lost all sound and collapsed into absolute silence. Strangely, I found myself standing near the bottom of the stairs, several feet from the phone booth. I saw the receiver still swinging back and forth. My mother-in-law came running down the stairs, her face twisted in terror. She rushed past me as if I were invisible, her eyes fixed somewhere to my left. I turned, and for the first time in my life, I faced my own death. My body lay there, burned and motionless. A woman knelt beside it, desperately pounding on my chest. As a doctor, I stood watching my own resuscitation with clinical detachment. I felt myself floating. I heard the screams. But no one heard me when I shouted, "I'm still here!" I drifted straight through the wooden wall in search of my wife. She was sitting on the floor, carefully painting a red flower on a child's cheek. I memorized the exact position of every chair, every brushstroke of color on her hand. These details later became proof that what I experienced was real, not a hallucination. Then suddenly, I was pulled upward, through the roof, and swept into a massive river of light. It was a radiant current of energy, overflowing with love and peace beyond anything words can describe. Within that brilliance, a great presence, the source of all life, surrounded me. Communication didn't happen through spoken words, but through direct knowing, flowing straight into my consciousness. I felt the voice resonate through every particle of my being. "Have you seen the truth about who you really are?" I replied in thought, stunned. "That body down there, it isn't me. I'm still alive, more vivid and free than ever. Why do I feel so peaceful?" The warm presence answered, "The soul is eternal. The body is only a worn-out coat you borrow to learn. The death you fear is simply a shift in frequency." I gazed into the river of light and asked, What is this place? Why is everything connected like a symphony? This is God's energy, the presence said. Every tree, every blade of grass, every lake, and even your soul is woven from this same vibration. But Tony, you cannot remain here. A wave of longing washed over me. Please, I begged. I don't want to return to that heavy, painful body. I want to stay in this river forever. You have not completed your mission. The presence grew more powerful. The world you lived in is a training ground. Every soul enters it to evolve. There are two paths, service to self or service to others. You devoted half your life to scientific mastery, but you lost the rhythm of compassion. Trembling, I asked, what must I do to return to the right path? A surge of energy poured into me. You will carry back a vibration from this realm of light. You will use music as the language to awaken sleeping souls. Choose the path of service to others. When you live for others, your soul will resonate with me. In an instant, an entire symphony, powerful, blazing like lightning, was downloaded straight into my soul. I felt each note carrying the power to heal and awaken. As darkness closed in to send me back, I heard the final message. Remember, Tony, the world is a test of faith, not a warehouse for material wealth. Go back and wake them. Pain tore through me. I was slammed back into the cold, broken body beneath the payphone. After my soul was forced back into that aching chest, I slowly understood something that shook the foundation of everything I'd ever believed, that clinical death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a spiritual countdown clock, quiet, relentless, and already ticking. The revelation I received established a time frame, clear, fixed, and immovable. It began at the impact point of that lightning strike in August of 1994. This was not a warning about short-term events measured in days or hours. Heaven doesn't rush the way human beings do. God opened for me an awakening window that would last exactly 14 years. This journey became a series of endurance trials. Time in the realm of light doesn't move in a straight line. But once I stepped back into the material world, I was commanded to climb through specific steps of time, one rung at a time. No skipping, no shortcuts. 1994 was the awakening. 2002 was the quiet training. 2006 was the scientific verification point. 2007 was the public disclosure. And finally, the peak of the revelation was the rebirth concert in 2008. 14 years for the mind of a trauma surgeon to be fully humbled, fully conquered by the frequency of the divine. The first sign appeared exactly 2 weeks after the accident. I was standing in my living room when I was suddenly overtaken by a strange hunger, an intense craving. I wanted to hear classical music from masters like Chopin or Mozart, even though I had never cared about it before. I'd spent my life playing soccer, fishing, and studying medicine. Music, to me, had always been meaningless background noise. But now, it became breath. And the very next day, an acquaintance called out of nowhere and asked if I could store an old piano for a while. Everything arrived as if it had been arranged in advance, like a hand you can't see, moving pieces into place. The second sign happened inside the operating room. I was in the middle of a complex hip replacement, my hands holding a scalpel and metal clamps. Then, without warning, a symphony with a heroic, thunderous character began roaring inside my head. It wasn't a vague melody. It was a complete block of sound, fully formed data downloaded directly into my brain from somewhere beyond space. The music was so loud I felt my skull vibrating. My colleagues stared when I froze mid-incision, sweat pouring down my face. The moment I stepped out of the OR, I rushed into the call room and grabbed every scrap of paper I could find, writing down the notes that were screaming inside me before they vanished. The third sign was a series of prophetic dreams repeating, relentless. In the dream, I stood behind a man on a massive stage, flooded with light. When he turned around, I realized it was me, but carrying an entirely different presence, a different authority, as if I had been rewritten from the inside out. The melody in the dream was so intense it woke me up at exactly 3:15 in the morning every night, and the music didn't fade when I opened my eyes. It compelled me to sit at the piano, even though my surgeon's hands, so steady with a blade, were clumsy and unfamiliar on black and white keys. The first major escalation came in 2006. I drove into New York City to meet the renowned neurologist Oliver Sacks. In his book-filled apartment, I sat at an antique Bechstein piano that had belonged to his father and played the first fragments I had managed to write down. Professor Sacks studied me with the astonishment of a scientist watching the impossible unfold in real time. He confirmed this was not a typical brain injury, but an extraordinary rewiring of the brain, an unusual phenomenon he later devoted the opening chapter of his book to, giving it a name, Sudden Musical Obsession. The second marker arrived in July of 2007. The story of the doctor who hears music from heaven exploded in the New Yorker. From a quiet surgeon, my name spread across America, and that spiritual earthquake triggered thousands of letters and phone calls, people desperate to know if the other side was real. Then came January 29th, 2008, my birthday. I stepped onto a stage to perform before hundreds of people and the lenses of international television. When the first notes of the Lightning Sonata rang out, I knew the 14-year cycle had reached completion. That was the day I formally released God's message to the world. The medical world does not easily accept a man who speaks of heavenly music. I began to feel an icy isolation right inside my workplace. The hospital board questioned my surgical competence. They asked, openly and privately, whether a doctor struck in the head by lightning could still be trusted to hold a scalpel. Strict neurological and psychiatric evaluations were imposed on me like punishment. Colleagues whispered behind my back, treating me as an eccentric or a man lost in post-traumatic hallucinations. My family endured violent storms as well. My wife couldn't understand why her husband was spending 12 hours every night at the piano instead of resting, being with the children, or simply returning to the person she thought she knew. The pressure of social judgment and the skepticism of the closest people in my life pushed me into a profound loneliness. There were moments I felt exiled from the very community I had served for decades simply because I chose to believe what I had seen on the other side. And yet, even as I was resisted at home, the message created a global wave. The BBC in the United Kingdom sent a film crew to document my story. German television and major European news agencies began covering my case as evidence pointing toward the reality of the soul. The music I brought back started being used in multiple countries as a form of spiritual healing. And I realized this revelation was not meant for me alone. It was aimed at millions of people losing faith across the world, crossing borders, languages, and nations. The most powerful reversal happened inside my own nature. From a surgeon grounded in evidence who believed only in what could be cut and repaired on an operating table, I became a messenger of light. Patients abandoned by the healthcare system, people crushed by grief, no longer came to me for bones and joints. They came to hear me speak about the river of God's energy. I had exchanged my position in life from a man who treated the body to a witness who helps heal the soul. My hands no longer existed only to hold instruments of steel. Now they trembled with the frequency of heaven meant to calm spirits that had lost their way. The final message I carried back from the realm of light was a strict command: this world is only a testing ground, a training place for the soul. Each of us is participating in a game governed by sacred laws. God is real, your soul is eternal, and you will be held accountable for what you do here. So I call on you, choose the path of serving others instead of living for the small cravings of the self. If you live only for yourself, you will disappear with the dust. But if you live for others, your soul will endure, resonating with the music of the source of light. Listen closely to the very first thought that enters your mind the moment you finish a prayer that is guidance, the touch of angels. Don't wait until lightning strikes you to wake up. Restore your faith today, right now. When I open my eyes, reality slammed back into place with the piercing shriek of a heart monitor. The sharp smell of disinfectant burned through my senses. I woke inside a body that felt as heavy as lead, every single cell, as if it had just been crushed by an enormous force. Doctors and nurses surrounded me, their lips moving while my ears caught only a hollow rushing sound, like wind tearing through a tunnel. They checked my reflexes, shined lights into my pupils. I could see fear etched across the faces of my colleagues. They were fighting to save the brain of a chief surgeon from permanent damage after a shock of millions of volts. But the strangest thing I felt wasn't pain. It was rhythm. The heartbeat on the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. The waves weren't chaotic the way the doctors feared. To me, They were tapping perfectly in time with the symphony I had heard inside God's river of energy. My heart had become a living instrument, vibrating to the frequency of the realm of light I had just left behind. A few days later, I asked to meet the woman who saved my life. She was a nurse who happened to be at the lake that afternoon. When she walked in, I looked straight into her eyes and said, "Thank you for not stopping after the 21st chest compression. I was standing beside you on the grass. I heard you whisper that your child was too young to lose a father." Her face drained of color. She admitted she had said those words, but only in her mind, silently, to keep herself going. The moment she nodded in confirmation, the last anchor tying me to material reality snapped loose. Science had no explanation for this, but my soul knew the truth. Yet this return came with a heavy price. When I went back to the hospital to resume surgery, I was hit with a terrifying shock. I stared at a familiar surgical tray and suddenly couldn't name the clamps or specialized scissors I had held thousands of times. I read patient charts, understood the pathology, knew exactly how to operate, but the Latin medical terms and the names of syndromes had vanished, wiped clean as if by an invisible hand. I stood in the locker room watching colleagues pass by, unable to call them by name. A once celebrated surgeon now looked like a confused intern inside his own cathedral. In exchange for that loss, I gained a new and powerful sense. When I looked at a patient, I no longer saw a joint replacement or a tumor to be removed. I saw fields of vibrating energy. I felt their pain and fear like melodies falling out of tune. I learned to live within this double reality. One side, the physical world with its rigid old rules, the other, a radiant layer of revelation constantly overlaying my vision. I began operating guided by the instinct of a soul that had touched the source of light. My hands moved to the silent music playing inside my mind, healing wounds that conventional medicine had never reached. I stand here today no longer as the surgeon, Tony Secoria, the man who once believed only in numbers and x-rays. That lightning strike stripped away my faith in a purely material world and replaced it with a deeper vision of life. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm simply here to share another human possibility, rebirth through awareness. Many people ask about the cost of this transformation. Yes, I lost the precision of professional medical terminology. Names and details faded from memory, but in return, I gained an extraordinary sensitivity to the world around me. As old knowledge grew quiet, I began hearing deeper vibrations, the music I had missed my entire life while rushing through existence. The greatest lesson after 14 years of searching wasn't a doctrine or belief system. It was simple: we are not just biological machines. Inside every person exists a pure form of energy, far beyond what the eyes can see. We aren't here to accumulate, we are here to experience and to connect. This world, with all its crises and trials, is sometimes the lightning we need to stop and ask, who am I really? You don't need a terrifying accident to begin listening to yourself. Give yourself one quiet minute each day. Step away from the noise. The very first thought that appears when you truly become still, that may be intuition, the compass guiding you home. Trust it. Whatever you choose to call the river of light, I saw God, the universe, or simply energy. The peace is real, and it exists all around you right now. If my story sparks even a small curiosity about life's wonder, then my mission is complete. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you've ever felt a strange connection to something greater, or simply want to value life more deeply, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you feel ready to live with greater meaning, starting today, leave 2 words: I appreciate. Let them remind us of the value of every breath. May you find your own melody in this world. May peace and inspiration walk with you wherever you go. We are all notes in an eternal symphony. So live in a way that makes your note shine. I'll see you again in the next journeys of awakening and understanding.